Good day to you. And as we proceed here through what continue to be uncharted territories, I hope that, as I mentioned before, you're continuing to find this class, if you have to begin with, welcome distraction, really, from everything that's going on with not only what's happening across the globe, but within the context of a media circulation situation. And so we can choose in this class to focus on the coronavirus as we go forward. It's one of the healing properties of a college class, is it not, that it can help you understand phenomena. That's the plural of phenomenon. It can help you understand phenomena that you wouldn't have otherwise understood. At least that's the premise of every day that I get up and go to work. So we happen to be taking on a subject today that happens to be an extension of Sigmund Freud's work in a lot of ways, and it couldn't get more personal than this when we're analyzing a media perspective. It is intimate, so to speak, in both a lyrical sense and also an implied sense, a connotative sense. I'm talking about erotic analysis. Erotic analysis, yes, you heard right if you haven't seen it in the chapter yet. It comes from the god of Eros, right? The god of love, the god of primordial lust. You know what that is? It's like an uncontained lust. You can't help yourself. And sublimated impulses. Boy, there's a heavy term, right? It's impulses that are you're constantly trying to press down because if you don't control them, you're going to get into trouble. And it's creative urges and ultimately fertility. Fertility has a strong biological component in this entire picture today, that human beings and other animals as well, having that built-in biological desire, some of us, to procreate, to have offspring. And so we're taking on today erotic analysis, and this really begins under theories of pleasure. It was not called erotic analysis. We get to erotic analysis later because it pretty much embraces the love and seduction side of the merchandising industry in this country, including pornography, and then infuses an academic theory, if you can believe that. Eroticism is infusing academic theory. We'll get to that in the back end of the class. But the theory starts out with what we can generally call theories of pleasure. Theories of pleasure, which has been avoided, by the way, overall by scholars. A tough subject to talk about. I mean, you can talk about the pleasure of food, you can talk about the pleasure of a painting, but if you talk about the pleasure of sex, it gets very, very messy. Sorry for the metaphor there. It gets very, very messy when you're talking about it in an academic setting. So really, it wasn't until the 1980s when scholars started to take a look at the construction of pleasure and how it functions in a particular context, like a media context. And Roland Barthes, the French philosopher from 1975, Roland Barthes, he wrote The Pleasure of the Text. That's his book. And he had three components of it that I want to cover here. One is plaisir. Plaisir, that's the French word. I had French a long time ago. I hope I'm getting it close. Plaisir, I think is how it's said. It's a comfortable pleasure that we get from passive interaction with the text. A comfortable pleasure that we get. Now remember, we're speaking at two levels here with erotic analysis. We're speaking at both the sexual level, because this academic perspective has been infused by just raw sexual overtures that human beings have to each other, but we're also being influenced at the academic level here. So the two levels here, the comfortable pleasure, one is the pleasure that we get from being around somebody that's very comfortable. You think they're good looking, for example, you like to stand next to them, you like the way they talk, you like the way that they carry themselves, you like their sense of humor. Hasn't gone any further, but you just like to be, you get the chance to be with them, you want to be with them. Could be a romantic person, could not. That's one level, that's a sexual level, but then you also have the same kind of passive interaction with the text. Like when you read something, you're comfortable with it, right? Like you read a critique of your favorite band and the person agrees with you, so you're comfortable with it, right? But maybe there's something about it that's, you have some disagreements with. Maybe the person has a strange perspective than you, and so they have a little bit of a distancing there as well, but you're still comfortable overall. That's one level of an erotic interaction with media content, is the plaisir interaction. Then there's also the next one, which is jouissance, and that's bliss, ecstasy, or at the sexual level, pure orgasm. And this is an ecstatic, disruptive pleasure. I mean, you think about the orgasm itself, it disrupts everything that you're doing. And that's the same idea behind a text that has this. There's active engagement with the text, which just absolutely disrupts you. I can tell you that when I first saw Ingmar Bergman's film Andalusian Dog, oh my God! I saw it in high school, and they showed a close-up razor blade cutting an eyeball, and I remember that image to this day. I still can't get it out of my mind. That's a disruptive, also pleasure in some way. It like taps in to everybody's desire, even though unwillingly, to see pain in some way, to at the very least know what it is like. So that's what we're talking about here. That may be an extreme example. Video games blasting with death. That is a kind of bliss, ecstasy, or orgasm, even in a metaphorical sense, that is a disruptive pleasure. That's a second kind of impact interaction at an erotic level that we can have with media texts. Next up is media erotics. Media erotics. This is a different way of looking at media. It's the idea that media have different effects on us based on the functions that media are producing. So one function is a transgression function. That's where action breaks with prevailing codes and conventions. And so if you're watching a television show at 6 o'clock in the evening and all of a sudden you see two females kiss each other for a long period of time, not just a peck, it's like, whoa, whoa, what's going on? That's not usual at 6 o'clock. At 11 o'clock on a streaming channel, that might be usual. Yeah, but that one at 6 o'clock. So that's a transgression. It's the prevailing codes are 6 o'clock is family time. They're eating dinner. The television needs to be safer. That's what transgression is about. There are others as well that I'm going to ask you to dig into on yourself. There's the productive. There's the sensuous, transgressive, productive ways the audiences interact with text. There's taboo text. That's be a good one for you to explore. Yeah, there's expenditure. That's an interesting com for you to take a look at. All of this involves subjective desires, and not just like an innate desire to produce. It's that what our desires are completely personal and sometimes uncontrollable. So let's talk about transgressive texts for a moment. Now let's move on to those. Transgressive texts are texts that when you interact with them, when you watch a movie, when you look at a web page, when you listen to a song on the radio, they transform you. They transform you in a way that you move from something over to something else. So it's not just like this bland experience between you and the producers of the content, that you actually, something happens big. Transgressive text. So you've got the writerly kind of transgressive text. The writerly text. This is a text that is unfinished and invites the audience to co-create. It's an unfinished text. It's like when you put a sentence in a tweet and you end it with ... We'll see what happens from here ... And the people that you're sending it to, you're hoping have some kind of similar conclusion, or maybe you're not, but at least you're inviting that possibility with you. It's an example of a transgressive text that's writerly. It's unfinished. And there's a lot of unfinished portions. Television is unfinished all the time when it shows two people going into a sex scene on television. They turn their backs, the camera drops to just above their waist, not showing their buttocks unless it's streaming television, but regular broadcast television, and then the characters move away. That's unfinished. That sort of invites the audience to imagine what's happening next. That's what we're talking about here. There's also intertextuality. Intertextuality, another kind of transgressive text where a text creates other texts, that out of that text creates a whole other text that is maybe sometimes becomes the primary text. The Beatles, a band that almost everybody knows, even though they've not been playing since 1970. The Beatles had an album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. There was a whole subtext running that they were making a commentary that Paul, the bass player, was going to die. So if you look at that album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, you can see Paul's the only one who's dressed differently. There's actually, if you put together a mirror over the drum kit, it says "He Die" and points a piece of a diamond at Paul. And there's lots of other hints on the album cover. Other bands have done that as well. It's a way of, the album is one text, right? You're supposed to be listening to that. Isn't that what it's mainly about? Listening to the music of the band? But no, there's this whole other text that came out of the album cover. There's also another kind of transgressive text called polyphony text, and that's many voices of a text. That's many voices, and so you've got a narrative voice, like a person who's observing and they're commenting on what's going along, and then all of a sudden you have one of the characters in the text speaking. So you have this in your average reality television show. You have the people actually in the place of house of residence. Let's say it's one of those elimination shows where the contestants get kicked out, like Big Brother. They're interacting, and then they interview them on the side. That's a second text. And then sometimes there's a narrator saying what happened when they're not allowed to display the text, like there's some confidential information was spoken between two characters, and so somebody else has to step in and say, this is why we can't tell you that. Now we have a narrator. polyphony texts. There's some other strange terms in here for transgressive text. I'm going to let you read them on your own here. We got the carnivalesque text. That's an interesting one. We've got the grotesque realism text. Check those two out. See if you can make sense of them. All right, now we're going to come up to transgressive practices. Transgressive practices, this is talking about how the reader or the audience, but the reader is we're starting to study the way that we talk about human beings when they interact with media, the reader or the audience member, what is imposed upon you to interact with that text so that you get the maximum potential for erotic interplay, if that's what your desire is. So the first is cruising. Yeah, a term that's actually used, that is not actually used, but was used first to describe gay males looking for other gay males in zones where males were open to being picked up, so to speak. And so that's a good example of how actual erotic behavior in society has been pulled in to academia here. And in this case, it refers to how the body is on the lookout for its own desire. The body is on the lookout. Like you're sitting there, you don't have any control of it. It's not like your sexual arousement is within your own control. It happens to you. It happens to you by media. It happens to you by the way that two people kiss on a screen. It happens to you by the beauty in a flower that you may see in a commercial. It may happen to you by pornography. It happens to you through multiple means, but the point is you're not controlling it with your mind. Is your body is awaiting that. And so similar to Freud, what happens after you start to shut it down. You start to shut it down. So we've got cruising, then we've also got drifting. Drifting is an interesting one. I'll let you check out that one on your own. We've got skimming. Skimming is another practice that the audience can practice. And this is really what we expect from all of our students in all of our classes, by the way, is skimming. It's not what you think. You would think it's, a great quick way to study for an exam. No, that's just not what it's doing. It's got a whole other function. I'm going to try and tease it for you so that you read it. All right, next up, we want to talk about user participation and user-created content, because that is a big part of erotic analysis, is the idea that the people who are making content that is being received in an erotic way, not the big necessarily money makers, it's just average everyday people. Otherwise, you wouldn't have amateur porn, for example. So user participation is where the audience engages with the text using an interface device. It's where the audience engages with the text using an interface device. So it's your cell phone today. It's the software that you're using. It's every single app that you're going into. It's the browsers. It's your laptop. It's your tablet. It's your smart watches that you have on today. It's every gadget that you have that you're using to interact with. And when you're going on to these gadgets, you're absolutely portraying yourself in the best way possible. You're putting yourself through a Snapchat filter. You're taking 4 or 5 photos and then selecting the best one, even though the difference between all the poses is very, very minute. You're sending photos sometimes with a slightly sensual, at very minimum, sensual look to you. Your lips you like in a certain way. I'm not going to go further with it. I'm sure that you know what I mean. This is user participation in an erotic kind of interplay using a device. And so user-created content is where the user creates the text. And there are other areas as well. Blogs, for example. People create blogs. They go anonymous all the time. All the social networking sites, you can say that that's very much in the wheelhouse of this point. YouTube channels even. All right, now we're going to finish for today with our final idea, which is fandom. Fandom, where does that word come from? It comes from fanatic, right? Fandom, you see it in sports. Boy, do you see it in sports. But here we're talking about fandom in a different way. A fandom is an organized community of people who have a special affinity for a media text. They love that media text. Could be a band. Everybody, like Kanye West has huge fandom out there. Donald Trump has huge fandom out there through his tweets. Professors have fans at the university. You guys, you have fans in your Instagram account. Many of you are YouTube influencers. So it's about the participation in cultural production. That's what we're talking about here, that fans today are participating in the production of culture. It's not just fans are receiving it, they're participating in media today primarily because of the internet and the phone. And you can read about the way that fans are participating. I'm going to mention one. It's semiotic productivity. Semiotic productivity, semiotic is meaning, right? This is the use of symbols The use of symbols in text. And you guys are inventing those symbols all the time. The amount of emojis today that are available is greater than last year. The amount of ways that you can go and select an image or a thumbs up or a smiley face to accent something you're saying and then bold it, put it in italics. This is what we're talking about here. This is semiotic productivity. You're creating new ways of interacting in text. And you can do that in erotic ways too. You can take a heart and you can make it steam. That's an erotic way of presenting a very simple symbol. So fandom is very important to take a look at, and there are two final comments you could take a look at, including enunciative productivity and textual productivity. But in the meantime, that's going to leave it with you there, because erotic analysis is, after all, an internal discovery, so there should be something internal about the chapter for you still to study. Have a great day.